Hey everybody, welcome to episode 13 of the AskDAP show, where we answer your Volkswagen and Audi questions. Let's get into the show.
John N via Facebook says, "Hey guys, are these bad readings? I've heard that the Mark 7s have built-in turbo gauges, but still, this seems high. I have the performance pack if that makes a difference."
Okay, so John, for anybody who's not familiar with what he's referring to, the Mark 6, I believe some GTIs, the Autobahns, and then the Golf Rs also have a built-in boost gauge to the new radios. The boost reading shown on the screen here is 29.4, and basically the reason why it seems so high is because it's not accounting for atmospheric pressure. Atmospheric pressure is 14.7 psi, which is the standard, and then you're going to add the difference, which in this particular case 29.4 minus 14.7 is actually 14.7. So at this current boost level, it's 14.7 psi. Now, why they do that, I have no idea. It kind of makes a useless boost gauge because no one's going to be doing math in their head. It will give you an idea of if you have a boost leak or less boost than you on average run. So it does solve that function, but other than that, it's kind of just a novelty because you would be much better served having an adjusted amount instead of atmosphere plus boost to give you your actual net number shown on the display.
KCT via Facebook. Okay, so this weather has me thinking about remote start. I have heard mixed reviews in terms of remote starter kits. What's the good, bad, and the ugly? I have a Mark 7 GTI. If I could get one installed, any recommended places? Pricing? On the other hand, any bad experiences? Thanks, fellas.
Okay, so the remote start on Mark 7s, or really any VW model, the biggest concern I always have with that stuff is to put a remote start on any current model car that's roughly since Mark 4 and up. They had immobilizer systems, which is basically there's a chip inside the key that has to verify when you go to start the car to make sure it initializes so that it's an anti-theft feature to prevent your car from being easily stolen. The problem is as far as I know, for any anti-theft or for any remote start system, you actually have to bypass that, which means they take a spare key and they actually put it inside the dashboard, which is slightly problematic for two reasons. One, you lose a spare key that probably costs 200 bucks, and two, you don't have a spare key. So if you lose your key, you're now in bad shape. The other part of that component is many times that I've seen remote starts installed in my time in dealerships, the people butcher the cars up and it causes a bunch of problems that people are not prepared for. So I generally don't recommend doing it because of that. Now, in this particular conversation that happened on Facebook, there was a guy who jumped in who seemed super knowledgeable about the cars, and there's some additional modules that you need to add. And it was about $1,000, he said, roughly, for what you were looking for to add a remote start reliably to that model. So not really something that I would generally recommend.
Simon via email says, "Hey DAP, my name is Simon and I have a 2006 VW Jetta 2.5 with some rust on both my front fenders and on the deck lid where the license plate lights are. I'd like to know if this is covered under VW's warranty, and if it is, what I need to do, what they will do to repair it, i.e. replace with a new deck lid or paint over, and how long it will take, the whole process. In case it's not covered under warranty, what do you suggest I do to repair this on my own? I'm also curious if there are any differences among VW dealers when it comes to accepting warranty claims. I've been reading some forums and that seems to be the case. I've included some images to get a better idea. Cheers."
Okay, so Simon, I saw that you asked this question to Charles the Humble Mechanic and he answered it as well, but I felt like there was a few things I could add to that because I reached out, us and also Charles, we're based in North Carolina, so we don't get a lot of rust cars here. The biggest rust problems are obviously north, being that you're in Canada, obviously a lot of rust issues up there. Obviously these rust issues are pretty significant on this car. Rust protection warranty is 12 years unlimited mileage. So based on the age of your vehicle, it should be covered under warranty. The problem is there are a few variables associated with that. Number one, if your car has ever been in an accident, meaning you've had body repair done on the vehicle or anything like that, if let's say you got in a rear end collision and the deck lid has been replaced and repainted before, if that was done by a non-certified VW repair shop, which is likely to be the case generally, it would not be covered under warranty. Now the fact you have multiple rust spots, I'm sure at least some of them will be covered, or mostly all of them. If you also have any external damage that caused the rust, for example, if you have a bunch of rock chips on your hood and they're rusting, that would not be covered under warranty. The other variable, a guy, good friend of mine, Duke, who works at a dealership up in Jersey, I reached out to him to get an idea of how they handle these situations, and what he said is that it has to not, the rust has to be perforating the metal, which means not just surface rust on a particular surface, but actually through the metal. No question, his deck lid picture is terrible, so that would indefinitely probably need to be replaced, the entire deck lid. If you were going to go through the process, as Charles mentioned, it would definitely take some time. You would have to go in, have them inspect it, then assume that you're not going to get anything accomplished that day, and they're just going to go through the process to send pictures to VOA or VW of Canada in your case, send it off, see what they could get covered, and then go from there. If you had to do it yourself, the best way to do it, no question, would be to buy a pre-painted deck lid from a junkyard. And Charles mentioned the same thing. The problem is, being that you're in Canada, I don't see how you're going to find a non-rusted deck lid in a junkyard, because basically in Canada, I assume rust is a pretty prevalent problem, and most of those deck lids are going to be rusted too. So you may have to buy either an aftermarket one or a used one or something like that. Either way, if you bought a new one, you'd have to get it painted, which is a really expensive proposition, and those are your options.
Gregory via Facebook asks, does anyone else's tranny look like this? 2007 2.5 Rabbit.
Okay, Gregory, so we already answered this question in the Facebook thread, but wanted to give it a little bit of information just so everybody out there. The issue with this 2.5 transmission is going to be a vacuum pump leak, or it's very likely to be a vacuum pump leak. That is a very common issue. They'll leak down the front of the block. People will think it's a rear main seal a lot of times, but it's coming down over the transmission housing, which is the vacuum pump on the driver's side of the cylinder head. The entire vacuum pump needs to be replaced because of the seal between the outside cover and the vacuum pump housing itself that leaks, and that is not available separately, so the whole vacuum pump needs to be replaced. Charles, the home mechanic, actually did a really awesome video DIY on this, and we have a link to an article that has more information about 2.5 vacuum pump failures. We'll link up both the video and that article in the description below.
A user on VW Vortex has a problem with the cracked wire harness under his fuel rail. Hey Paul, thanks for the AskDAP show. I'm watching every episode. Even though there's tons of information, I couldn't find an answer to my question. I'm driving an A3 2007 FSI, so when I remove the intake manifold to clean the valve for carbon buildup, I notice that the wire harness that's running right under the fuel rail has become badly fragile. The outer tubing was partially gone and the wires were exposed. I would like to know what is connected by this harness so that when something breaks, I will know what that is, most likely from the wire harness.
Okay, so Audi A3. When you're removing the manifold, you found, it sounds like the injectors, that the harness of the injectors has cracked sheathing. This is kind of a problem that happened on the previous models, where the wiring in the engine compartment would actually have grounding issues, and the grounding would crack over time and the sheathing would kind of start to break away. If that's happening on your vehicle, the problem is there's really no way to stop it or head it off. If it's starting to happen, it's probably something that's going to continue to happen further down the wiring. Obviously, you don't want to expose wires anywhere in your engine compartment, just because if they ground out, you could potentially have a fire or big problems with the engine, you know, cause component failure if things short out, blah, blah, blah. A million other things that are bad associated with that. The problem is the only way to replace it is going to be by replacing the engine harness and or putting in a new piece of wire where that is, but that's kind of like putting a Band-Aid on something that needs staples or stitches, because it's not really a proper fix. If the wire sheathing is starting to have problems, if it's literally all the wire sheathing that's becoming an issue, it's going to need to be replaced. And unfortunately, you will need an engine harness, which is 2 separate parts that come from the ECM usually. The ECM will have 2 large connectors on it. One of them has more than the other. One's like, I don't know, like 70 or 80 pins. The other one's like 40. And they basically are control everything in the engine compartment together. Usually on most cars, like ignition coils, injectors, alternator, and all like knock sensor, oxygen sensor, a lot of those connectors are all on one harness together. It is pretty big and pretty expensive usually, and they're like $500 to $700 range for the entire engine harness that makes up those components. Thank you for watching episode 13 of the AskDAP show. If you want your questions answered, shoot us an email, info@shopdap.com.